in the invasion of Cuba. They have assisted in counter-revolutionary plots in Africa.
The March 13th revolution meant everything to us. Food, employment, health, everything to us. It means our lives. You know, if it comes to that, it means our lives.
Everywhere I go, people want to know how I happy so. Why Grenada me come from? Why Grenada me come from? Why Grenada me come from?
Radio Free Grenada, the voice of the revolution. Our time is now 16 and a half minutes after 10 o'clock. You're onto the program Community Contact with Eugenie Johnson and Trevor Tweeds.
Tomorrow, the big day, March the 13th, the day when Grenada celebrates the first anniversary of our revolution. Let's make this the biggest and best rally Grenada has ever seen as we come together tomorrow at Queen's Park to celebrate our Freedom Day, March 13th.
Everywhere she goes, people wants to know how she whining so. Why Grenada she come from? Why Grenada she come from? Why Grenada she come from? Everywhere she goes, people wants to know how she sexy so. Why Grenada she come from? Why?
Radio Free Grenada, the voice of the revolution, educating, informing, and entertaining. Our time is now 23 minutes after 10, and now for today's festival news. More billboards and banners are needed, and an appeal is going out to all Grenadians to contribute generously in helping to underscore the expenses of the celebration.
Some 3,000 guests will be in Grenada tomorrow for the Festival of the Revolution. They are coming to celebrate with us the finest year in the history of our beautiful island. It happened 1 year ago, on March 13th, 1979.
The government of the criminal dictator, Eric M. Gary, has been overthrown.
On the Saturday before the Tuesday, we received word from the intelligence sources that another attempt was going to be made on our lives. The plan was that Gary was going to leave the country on Monday midday, and the instructions that were being left behind was that we should be liquidated. That left us in a position where we had to choose whether to sit and wait for liquidation or whether we should move on the offensive. What we did was that from our positions in hiding, we were able to contact our main groups around the country, our main individuals, hold an immediate meeting of about 12 of us in fact, and there the decision was taken that the next morning we should, at this point in the name of the people, move to seize power.
We figured out we couldn't wait no longer, that if we showed our heads again, it would be death, that the blood will flow in Grenada, and therefore we had to move by Tuesday morning, and we moved. I think it says something of the quality of NGM and the organization of the party. We have had to live for the past 5 years under the most repressive kind of conditions. And therefore, to stay alive, we have had to organize, to learn, to be able to move quickly, and to be able to do things in an efficient way. And therefore, I think, in a sense, Gary's repression was part of the reason for his own destruction, his repression. Over the years, over 20 people have been murdered by Gary, political murders. However, we knew that once we were able to move and destroy his crack force, his mongoose gang army, that the people themselves, the population as such, would rise, because it was a volcano under thin, under repression. And therefore, once we had broken a vent, that everything would just erupt. From 4:15, we captured everybody. Only one man was killed, and one person from Gary's defense force. Nobody sustained a scratch from outside.
It means to me freedom in every sense, and I'm satisfied with the revolution as a Grenadian, knowing exactly my position in the country that I was before, right?
This Tuesday morning when I got up, I was such a surprise, thinking it's a joke, somebody, one of the announcers with the Grenada getting along with. And when I understand it is true, I felt relieved for myself, right? I was glad about it, because I know we wasn't a deep strain here, we're having a strain. And then I went out and started assisting the guys, right?
Yeah, well, I'm happy for this revolution, and I think that this is the best thing that could ever happen to Grenada. Although most of the people don't quite understand what's going on, but in a short time they will, and I think that they will accept it too, because they need it, you see.
You try with a federation, the whole thing end in confusion. Curriculum and then character, but somehow a spelling disaster. Mr. West Indian politician, you went to a big institution, and how come you can't unite 7 million? When a West Indian unity, I know it's very easy. If you only rap to your people and tell them like me, them is one race, from the same place, that make the same trip, on the same ship. So we must push one common intention, it's for a better life in the region, for the woman and the children. That must be the ambition of the Caribbean man, the Caribbean man, the Caribbean man.
So now this revolution came about. It was easy sailing, because even some of the people that were in the police force and some in the army, they got totally fed up, and they were just waiting for the hour to come. But everybody was just afraid of the mongoose gang. And then that day, when everybody heard that, they were so happy that everybody just dug arms, because they were happy. They were very, very happy about this change, because they were suffering too long and you can't say anything.
Because the difference between Gary now and within Free Grenada, as I will say, it was not free. I, for instance, when I got to leave work at the night, I had to think about secret police to beat me up. I got to think about the green bees, and also I'm in a dread position of getting home from the dock at night. So now I could walk freely, sleep anywhere if I choose to, and I'm happy. Hats off to the revolution.
Within 8 months of the revolution, the government of Grenada has been able to award 109 scholarships to students, in contrast to 3 which the Gary dictatorship awarded students in 1978, 79.
Now during Gary's reign, you just couldn't motivate these children to do the exam, because they would tell you things like, what sense does it make, Even though we get those things, we don't get a job. They had to get Gary's kind of exam first. You had another kind of exam to pass. It was the girls who could go down to Evening Palace would get the job that all of those were educated to do. That's why we have that new term, sexploitation. So that's why sometimes you hear somebody saying communism. Well, communism is better than Garyism. And why is it now that we're looking towards something better we're hearing so much about our government now, which is better than the other government, and not doing the kind of things that Gary was doing. Now what is it? Is the world upside down or something?
Under the days of Hurricane Gary, with an unemployment situation of over 50% of the workforce, and among women, over 70% unemployed, unable to find jobs. And in the case of women, those few who did eventually manage to get a job, many of them, in return for the job, had to sell their bodies before they would get the job. And with the ending once and for all in our country of the sexual exploitation and victimization of our women, we say a real democratic basis for the participation of our women has been laid. There are those who believe that you cannot have a democracy unless there is a situation where every 5 years and for 5 seconds in those 5 years, a people are allowed to put an X next to some candidate's name. And for those 5 seconds in that 5 years, they become Democrats. And for the remainder of the time, 4 years and 364 days, they become once again non-humans, non-people, without any right to say anything to their governments, without any right to be involved in running their country. There are many people outside of our country, and maybe a few inside, who would like to see this revolution turn back. You must understand why we have abolished in our country exploitation. There are those who would like to see the return to the old system. And there are those, the imperialists, who would like to continue to plunder our natural resources, who would like, as Comrade Unison Whiteman was saying just now, to buy our bananas and our cocoa and our nutmegs and what we produce for little or nothing.
The fact of the matter is, once we as revolutionaries recognize our enemies, half the problem is solved. We have recognized our enemies, and we are prepared to struggle unendingly to defend this country and this revolutionary process.
Our government was removed on 2 occasions. The first in 1953 and the second time in 1964. Any revolutionary government will face the same problems that we face, that Allende faced 10 years after, that Cuba has been living with for many years. And the reason for that is that from the time the Truman Doctrine was enunciated, it was clearly stated that a free enterprise capitalist system is synonymous with freedom and democracy. Truman even went on, even with freedom of worship. And he said that planned economies were not the way to freedom and democracy. And anybody who talks about planned economies were really out of the pale, so to speak, and would come into attacks by the American system. In fact, Truman in that doctrine said that the American system must not only survive in America, but it must become a world system. And so any revolutionary movement in any part of the world, especially since the balance of forces has shifted decisively now in favor of socialism, particularly last part of the last decade, they are now becoming hysterical, and therefore they will want to destabilize this government.
In Jamaica, we had quite a rich experience of destabilization from the Central Intelligence Agency in particular, and United States imperialism in general, we experienced three different kinds of destabilization techniques and tactics. The first one was the creation of reactionary violence. The burnings, fires, raids by terrorists relying on the gunman cult in Jamaica into the communities of the working class, into the progressive areas in the town, in Kingston in particular. And this had an extremely terrifying effect in the first instance on the ordinary masses of the people.
Two survivors of last Sunday's attack in Greenwich Town say what happened.
I wasn't sleeping. I heard the man came and kicked the door down. I heard it's just fire opening and kill 5. After leaving, they go next door and kill 2. So I flied out by my room and faced them with the baby. It's only me and the baby alone, and they just opened fire, just pure fire looking into pure fire.
Who was in this room?
Rachel, Donna, Vivian, Joycey, and Herbie.
He said that gunmen had visited the compound here before. Can you tell us what happened?
Yes, and they came here last month and attacked Donna and me and my son and tell we must hide the face in the pool out there and said to Donna, say, he's socialist. Or come for kill a socialist.
There's no question but what the CIA, through local security services, has been very much involved in the so-called death squads in various countries. Those assassinations, which are not directed against a particular leader, would be an integral part of any intensive destabilization program as they were in Jamaica over the last 8 years. The Caribbean has been a strategic area for the United States for 150 years. But recently, the problem has been the natural resources of the Caribbean, particularly oil in Venezuela and Mexico and other places, and also the importance of the socialist revolution in Cuba, and the fear that socialism would pass to other countries in the Caribbean, and that would naturally weaken U.S. traditional control of the islands and the countries which are adjacent to the Caribbean. In the specific case of Grenada, obviously it's the first English-speaking socialist revolution in the Western Hemisphere. In fact, in the whole world.
I think from the earliest days, there was very clear evidence of the various forms of destabilization, the well-known forms being directed against the government, in terms of propaganda destabilization, attempts at economic destabilization, which are also continuing, and also violent destabilization. We know, for example, on the authority of the Washington Post and other sources, that within the first month of the revolution, one branch of the United States establishment, very likely the National Security Council, was seriously considering the question of a naval blockade against our country. Beyond that, in the early weeks of the revolution, there were a number of instances of arson. And one particular night, 2 buildings were burnt out in the space of half an hour of each other. One of them being the leading travel agency, and the other being a government-owned cottage right down here in the heart of the tourist belt, with all its obvious repercussions and implications for tourism.
For Grenadians, destabilization means that after years of struggle to free the country, to achieve democracy, after so many people have died, after so many people have been beaten up and tortured and so forth, that a big country just comes in and tells you that you better do what we want now, otherwise you're in for trouble. It means, for instance, the U.S. ambassador coming to tell us within 1 month of the revolution that we better not be friends with Cuba, we better not have anything to do with Cuba, Otherwise, there will be trouble with our tourist industry. It means that when we say no to that and we expose that to the people, that there follows an intensive propaganda campaign with all kinds of lies about Grenada.
There's enough trouble going on right in our own backyard, the Caribbean, our winter playground, where some very serious games are in progress, and Cuban influence spreads in the Caribbean. What's going on can be seen in Grenada, tiny Grenada in the eastern Caribbean, a revolution last year and now close ties to Cuba. Independence Day in Grenada is this coming Thursday, March the 13th, but the celebrations are going on now.
Revolutionary rhetoric, political repression, and guns. Powerful tools for reshaping society. Grenada is following the Cuban example. Who in the East Caribbean will follow the Grenadian example? That's something for American global strategists to think about.
The media operations of the CIA are some of the most important because their purpose is to influence how people believe. They're to influence public opinion. Jamaica is a very good current example of the use of propaganda through the local media to undermine public support for government or for political movement. The Daily Gleaner, as everybody knows, carried on an 8-year campaign against the Manley government. Basically, it was a campaign against socialism.
The Daily Gleaner, which must rank as one of the most long-standing reactionary media in the Caribbean, if not in the Latin American region, printed every conceivable kind of lie, focusing primarily on anti-communism as a means of discrediting the government and discrediting the progressive movement. This was closely coordinated with the external media, the media in the direct ownership and control of United States imperialism, the Wall Street Journal, the Time magazine, the Newsweek stuff, which did horror stories.
In this 1961 election, for the first time in our history, the American embassy went to the streets with projectors and films, 16mm films, anti-Castro, anti-communism, because they were linking the PPP.
Moved toward progressive free government in the Latin American family of nations. Instead, he raised his voice against the United States, accepting political and economic ties with the communist powers, Russia and China. There was growing concern in most of the Western Hemisphere.
Hysterical headlines, for instance, such as Cuban warships on the horizon. Secondly, customs seized, crates of guns coming for the PPP government from Cuba. In that kind of way, they incited the population. I remember when I saw Allende in 1972 in Chile, and told him precisely how the CIA worked in Guyana. And exactly the same methods were used in Chile that were used in Guyana to overthrow the government there.
El Mercurio, as many other papers in the continent, have played a very important role in destabilizing governments. It seems that there is a recipe that is applied when a government does not go through the wishes of multinationals, of foreign capital, of imperialism. So what we had, it's El Mercurio presenting the news. The whole world was distorted. Every page you would see the word communism, crisis. Every day in the paper you would see something threatening your family, your church, your children, and the economy of the country. It spoke about shortages, about chaos in the government, about nobody taking decisions. All this in a very serious tone, like with very good studies and with authority. So people that have read the Mercurio for years and years and years, especially the middle class, would really be shocked every morning and scared to death of what was going on. And they never realized that they went out in the streets and what they were saying, that what they were reading in El Mercurio was not happening.
This is a weapon which we cannot underestimate, because the press and the radio and the television can really incite the working people to go against even their own interests, not armed with all the facts.
The fact is that the media in the region, although there are many newspapers and radio stations, a great number of those are controlled by one man. And therefore, when you think you're hearing the voice of several different organs, in fact, you're hearing the voice of one man. This is used against the people in the region to scare them about the Grenada Revolution. In the case of Grenada, the arm of the regional media was the Torchlight newspaper.
Reading that Torchlight here brings very sour memories to me, because it's the same kind of titles presenting the news in a negative way towards the government, but without stopping. This article talks about Soviet bases in the Caribbean, and they always use the same threat. For instance, we had some fishing boats from Soviet Union, and right away the story in El Mercurio was that the Soviets were building up bases and very mysterious operations were going on in the country. And I see the same thing, Soviet in holiday paradise. It's the same kind of implications that the Soviets will use Grenada for their own rocket bases. So I don't know how they are so blunt doing these things. They don't even use more imagination. It's always the same thing. The Soviet threat, the Cuban threat, the same recipe that was applied in Chile is now being applied in Grenada.
The Torchlight newspaper was beginning to be used for counter-revolutionary activity, was beginning to be used to incite violence by sections of the population against the government and our people. That we will not allow by anybody, whether it is in the church, whether it is in the newspaper, or any other area. That is the position of the Torchlight. So the directive that was given by the commander of the army continues to stand.
Destabilization cannot be fought in secret. Destabilization itself is a secret form of manipulating a country, of trying to tear down a country little by little, where it is not possible for a big power to directly enter and take over that country. But we know that the only answer to that type of secrecy, that type of secret attack, is for us to lay the whole thing open to the people.
One of the most important things I think to remember about the CIA is that it is simply an instrument, and that all of its activities are directed from outside the agency, so the real argument is not with the CIA but with American policy made by presidents and others. But at the end of the line, it is the local person in whatever country we're talking about on whom the CIA depends. And when a person is recruited as an agent by the CIA, the money factor helps to turn his loyalty away from his own government and people to the United States, and institutionally to the CIA.
We are aware that the American Institute for Free Labor Development, otherwise known as AFILD, is really an arm of the CIA. It has, even from before the revolution, taken people from Grenada for training in Washington, other parts of the world, and specifically with the aim of operating in an undemocratic way within trade unions. We also know that it has trained people from other countries in techniques of destabilization and in techniques of assisting imperialism to overthrow progressive governments.
I'm first Vice President of the Grenada Steaming and Waterfront Workers Union. The dock workers as a whole play a very important role both in the economic and social development of Grenada. First of all, everything that comes in and leaves Grenada is handled by the dock workers. I was selected to represent Grenada at a training course in Front Royal, Virginia. The theme of the course was New Concept in Labor Relations. The people at AFIL were anti-socialist, anti-communist, anti-progressive trade unions in the Caribbean. They saw the socialists and the communists as a threat. What they said is that in the trade union movement in communist country, you have no freedom. There's no freedom in the trade union in communist country. So that we must fight ruthlessly to prevent any communists or socialists from getting from infiltrating in our trade union.
The Institute opened up local offices in all the major cities in almost every country in Latin America and in the Caribbean also. And their purpose was to give local training, to select the best people and send them for longer, more specialized and more political training in Washington, and then to send them back to their home country where they would be paid a full salary just to do organizing work.
It was true, AFIL, that the trade union CIA agents came in the country, posed as trade unionists. Howard McCabe was one of them. John Doherty Jr. was another. There were a whole series of them. In fact, there was a secret report written in '63, which was withheld from us by the Security Department, because the British were in charge of the security then. And it named some of these CIA agents as being responsible for the dynamited government buildings, for involvement in this strike, and so on. Later it has come out that the CIA was financing the strike. In other words, they were paying the people to be on strike.
I could remember specifically at the opening ceremony, a lot of questions were asked about the role AFIL is playing and who finances AFIL and this sort of thing by some of the students from the Caribbean and Latin America, you know. And we never really got direct answers, you know. We all got long, drawn-out answers. I guess basically to sort of confuse you.
The training programs in the trade union field are set up in the tradition of American trade union organizations. And this is a myth that trade unions should be economic institutions. They should be involved in getting better wages and working conditions and the bread and butter issues. Whereas in fact there's no such thing as a non-political trade union. Trade unions are the most political things in the world, and the CIA knows this very well.
We in the progressive movement in Grenada, progressive trade unions in Grenada, understand what AFIL is and are trying to explain it to the workers and to foment as much opposition as we can to AFIL program in Grenada, pushing the CIA trade union line in the Caribbean, the line that workers shouldn't be involved in politics, workers shouldn't be in government and so on. When employers are involved in government, and big businessmen control the government. They didn't say anything about Gary being in government before March 13th, and Gary was president for life of the biggest trade union in Grenada Manual Maritime Electrical Workers Union. Roy St. John, the Minister of Labour, was first vice president of Gary's union. And none of them at that time said anything about that.
The average dock worker is a very conscious man. He supports the revolution 100%, and that he's been fighting for it for years. And I think that in cases of destabilization, what could be attempted is that they might try, the reactionaries, they might try to use a legitimate grievance of the dock worker, to try to cause them to strike.
This is Radio Free Grenada, the voice of the revolution. A strike has been called at the Queen's Park Power Station by the Technical and Allied Workers Union. The possibility of an electricity blackout over the entire island tonight concerns security forces who are currently rounding up the suspects involved in an attempt to overthrow the People's Revolutionary Government. TAU President Curtis Stewart cannot be reached for comment.
The activities leading up to the strike stem mainly from negotiations and so on we were having with the company, and up to this stage the contract hasn't been signed. So my way of thinking, I feel that before we had strike, we should have gone through other channels first. But I'm not a leader of the union.
The union, which called that strike, is under the control of right-wing trade union leadership.
There were some negotiations going on with the electrical workers, and suddenly Mr. Stewart called a strike. The strike was actually unofficial. The way he did it was very clandestine. He had one individual who stayed at the door and primed the men as they went into work that they were going on strike.
Mr. Curtis Stewart, the former president of TAU, is the man responsible for EFIL's education program in the entire Caribbean. And we can draw our own conclusions from that.
What happened on the day we had decided to take strike action is that Curtis Stewart came down at the power plant and he told us that after speaking to us, he told us that we are free to take whatever steps we want to take, right? And he also gave 3 phone numbers, but he could not have been found at any of these places. So to me, that sounds kind of fishy.
He left the country. Subsequently, we learned that he had made preparations to leave a long time ago.
Even workers in that very department, not one of them stepped up to ask a question, well, why are you asking us to strike now? I think it was linked in some way with the abortive plan to overthrow the government.
Comrades in government, brothers and sisters, we, the honest and sincere workers of the Queen's Park Power Station, would like the government in particular, and the public in general, to know that we, the workers of the power station, are standing firmly behind the revolution and will defend it to the utmost. But we must agree that our action coincided nicely with the devilish plot of the cruel counter-revolutionaries. I am appealing to the government to make the air clear on these matters, because it has dampened our image as champions of the revolution.
We put our people on full alert. We spelled out information that had come into our possession, indicating a plan that was supposed to have come from the CIA. We think that there is substantial evidence that would indicate an external involvement.
This plot was basically going to have 2 stages. The first stage was going to center around firebombing and otherwise burning out buildings in St. George's The second stage was going to be the landing of the 3 boats in the various parts of the island, and from there fanning out to the various targets which these counter-revolutionaries had identified. The plan involved the use of local counter-revolutionaries and also of foreign mercenaries that were going to come in on these 3 ships. These mercenaries were going to have excess arms which they were going to pass on to the locals whom they hoped to attract and to interest in their murderous plan.
The whole background of the counter-revolution was prompted by people from outside and people generally in the society who thought they had something to lose. And so they was using elements who they could have fooled into themselves being disenchanted. Because of the type of stuff that we found, it is not the ordinary type of guillotine that we use in Grenada for blasting, but it was really high-powered stuff, and you must have had this from some outside source. And the kind of documents that we found making statements about NATO, we were never involved in any treaty with any country to say we had to learn anything about NATO, and that definitely was a source of outside influence. Our revolution, in the very early days of the revolution, we made it clear that we want to build our own system, and we do not intend for anybody to tell us how we should run our country. As the Prime Minister always says, we're not in anybody's backyard.
I'm establishing a permanent, full-time Caribbean Joint Task Force headquarters at Key West, Florida. I will assign to this headquarters forces from all the military services responsible for expanded planning and for conducting exercises. This headquarters unit will employ designated forces for action if required. This will substantially improve our capability to monitor and to respond rapidly to any attempted military encroachment in this region. The United States has a worldwide interest in peace and stability. Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of Defense to further enhance the capacity of our rapid deployment forces to protect our own interests and to act in response to requests for help from our allies and friends. This was not the kind of classic assault on a hostile beach the Marines made famous during World War II, so no one waded ashore, weapons blazing. Rather, this was a practice exercise designed to determine how fast Guantanamo could be reinforced with fresh troops if attacked. The newly arrived Marines quickly marched off to take up defensive positions along the 17 miles of fence that separates the base from the rest of communist Cuba.
The U.S. government has an established pattern of using gunboat diplomacy, blockades, destabilization tactics, and other Cold War measures against the peoples of Latin America and the Caribbean. It is an attempt to revive the Monroe Doctrine, under which the United States claims the unilateral right to intervene militarily in the domestic affairs of any country in the region. We uphold the democratic right of the people of the Caribbean to choose their own government or political system. The Caribbean belongs to the peoples of the Caribbean. We reject the U.S. plan to set up a Caribbean task force, and we call upon the international community to join with us in demanding an immediate withdrawal of this proposal.
Totalitarian Marxists are in control of the Caribbean island of Grenada, where Cuban advisors are now training guerrillas for subversive action against other countries, such as Trinidad, Tobago, Grenada's democratic neighbor. In El Salvador, Marxist totalitarian revolutionaries, supported by Havana and Moscow, are preventing the construction of a democratic government. Must we let Grenada, Nicaragua, El Salvador all become additional Cubas, new outposts for Soviet combat brigades? With all of the terrorist and military threats confronting us, we need a first-class intelligent capability with high morale and dedicated people. We have the means to regenerate our intelligence organization, and I would employ those means.